Hi guys, alright, we're back to do another pumpkin challenge. I've decided to retire this jack-o'-lantern and I'm going to test it using two different swords. So, these swords are pretty dissimilar from one another. I have the Hanwei Pearce Viking sword, and I have an Chen Jian. This is the Scarlet Sunrise from the Jian dynasty. So these two are in many ways similar, other than the fact that they're both straight and double-edged. This one is again from, a sword that's modeled after European swords from the, let's say, 9th century AD. This Jian dynasty goes back to around the 4th century AD. One of the reasons I'm interested to test how they're going to perform against a heavier target like this is they have very different types of ways of doing damage. We have a sword that over here has a very broad blade and is also quite heavy as far as the overall weight of the sword. So this one comes in as around 1,200 grams altogether. The Jian, by comparison, has a diamond cross section and only weighs around 600 grams. So we're talking about a sword that's half the weight of this Viking era sword. I did a video a little while ago talking about the effect that a fuller has. So there's going to be a very big difference in blade geometry and final edge. This one has had a little bit of difficulty with the edge. I just spent time putting extra sharpness on, so it is up to paper cutting sharp at the time of this filming. So both of them should have a good enough final apex to be kind of fair in comparison as far as that's concerned. But at the same time, the dynamics of them are such that this has a lot of authority and weight with the mass distribution way out here in the blade to make powerful sweeping cuts, ostensibly to be able to go through heavier targets, whereas the Jian is very light with very little of the weight in the hilt and pivot points out in the end of the blade to be able to maneuver around another swordsman or another spear or what have you, to be able to deliver thrusts and quickly reposition themselves for strikes. Now the question is, what's it going to do against a heavier target like this pumpkin? This pumpkin is quite dense. It does have some cutouts of it, but hopefully it'll stay intact long enough for us to give a couple of cuts. I have no idea what's going to happen. I'm going to start with the heavier Viking sword, and again, this is like comparing a four-door sedan like a BMW against a two-door sports car. And notice I'm still making comparisons between two different types of car instead of something big like a dump truck. This, at the end of the day, still behaves more like a sword than it does a hammer or a mace or an axe. So these are still two different types of swords in the spectrum of swords. They do handle very differently, and they're potentially going to do damage differently. This one by carrying more inertia in the blade, this one perhaps using leverage and speed in order to do damage. Let's get to it. Let's see what it can do. All right, I'm going to pretend I have my Viking shield. I'll have the sword in a retreated position, the sword hand held back. We don't know exactly how Viking swords were used, but this seems to be what Carolingian age artwork seems to show. I'm going to take a step forward, and I'm going to just do a simple downward cut. All right. And we took a nice firm cut out of my pumpkin. Here, I'll show that to everyone. It went through pretty smoothly. The pumpkin cracked a little bit, but that had more to do with the landing than on the sword cut. Here is the actual chop, and it went through very smoothly. So it went through the hardest part. And again, a pumpkin is kind of backwards from a human target. The hardest part is on the outside, and it gets softer and softer towards the inside. So it's almost like the bone analog is on the outside, on the rind. That's kind of equivalent to hitting a bony part. And the inside is just kind of fleshy and more like going through muscle. So it's a little bit different than chopping through a limb. And again, I am no great expert at Jian, so please do not take your cues from me as to how to practice Chinese swordsmanship. So that went pretty smoothly. All right, I'm trying to piece together my pumpkin. No, that's actually a very smooth cut. Huh. I thought that I hit it and it bumped out. I think that the blade may have wobbled very slightly because I went through this through the opening here, and as a result it flexed slightly, because at the end of the day this is a more flexible sword than the Viking sword. All right. So I didn't quite make it all the way through on that second cut. And we're not going to be able to see it here because my poor pumpkin has come to pieces. But I basically made it like 60% of the way through, and then the pumpkin came apart. That skipped off. There, that was a little bit better. So there, you can see, I just struck a piece, and rather than going all the way through, it hit, and it just skipped out. I'll try again to cut right through the rind. All right, that time it went all the way through. And if I try and do the same thing with the Jian on the other side, much easier. So where does that leave us? Against the entire target of the pumpkin, when the pumpkin is whole, it is big enough and thick enough that the firmness of the Viking sword, I think, is superior. It shows that it has the inertia of the thicker blade, and that helps it power through such a large target. Against a small target, even when the material is tough, this by itself is not thick enough and tough enough for a sharp steel sword, even as thin and what apparently it looks as delicate as the Chinese Jian. So in this case, it's easier to cut through a pumpkin that's, you know, maybe 3.5, 4 centimeters thick than it is with the Viking edged sword, because the Viking sword is harder to accelerate. You can't make it move as swiftly, so it's relying more on its mass and sharpness, and that makes it very difficult to cut through a small piece like this. So again, different swords for different situations, different applications, and different targets. Remember, whenever you're doing test cutting, to keep that in mind. Do you want to use a pool noodle? Do you want to use a water bottle? Do you want to use a big pumpkin? They're going to give you different information about what type of a strike you're performing and what type of a sword that you have. Till next time, guys. Take care.